folks, and thanks for joining us here at SomeFuture for episode 14 of our podcast. We're your hosts, Jack and Chris.
Hey!
Guess what, guys? Today we're going to be talking about tech. No, right? As always, we try to look at multiple perspectives in an attempt to give you, our audience, a chance to make your own conclusions about the validity of the arguments that we'll be putting forward. On Present Futures, we will be discussing the future of materials and the power of the big four tech companies in the U.S. Are they gods? On PaleoFutures, we will be talking about every nerd's dream conversation, Star Trek. And on FizBiz, we will be discussing how to invest in artificial intelligence. And as always, we will have a prominent futurist as our guest. We hope that you enjoy our show, and please visit our website and blog where we post our supporting materials at www.somefuture.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle at SomeFuture or visit us on our Facebook page. We always welcome your engagement with questions, concerns, or ideas of things you would like to hear about on our podcast by emailing us at somefuturepodcast@gmail.com or by engaging with us on social media. Now let's see what the future has in store for us in SomeFuture.
That's SomeFuture.
So on Present Futures, we've talked a lot about new technologies that create new substances or materials that didn't exist before and the possible application of these technologies. Well, for my Present Futures today, I found a University of Virginia School of Medicine report that lists how scientists have unlocked the secrets of a so-called indestructible virus and what this could mean when it comes to creating super durable materials and treating disease.
Indestructible virus? Is this some sort of Resident Evil thing? Like, what are we talking about? Like, geez, there's going to be a zombie apocalypse going to happen?
Yeah, so according to the report, the discovery reveals something that's never before been seen in the natural world. That's how amazing that this discovery is. So potential uses include everything from pinpoint delivery of cancer drugs so that they only attack tumors to building materials that could better withstand an earthquake's tremors. So the virus is actually called Acinetus hospitalis filamentosus, virus 1. Really long name, right? And they found it in the hot springs in Yellowstone National Park, in the bubbling pools of acid in which the temperatures often exceed over 175 degrees. The virus was first isolated in 2002 by David Prangasavili from the Pasteur Institute and his colleagues. Now, University of Virginia researchers have determined it is protected by a type of membrane science has never before encountered. Its outer coat is half as thick as known cell membranes, yet it is amazingly stable. That's because the unusual horseshoe-shaped arrangement of its membrane molecules that provide a small yet remarkable durability that scientists might be able to duplicate for many other purposes. So, for example, it may offer a way to make microscopic particles of medicine shelf stable so that they don't need refrigeration. So imagine the vaccines that you could send to Africa and not have to worry about being refrigerated. Another likely application is that it could be used, like I said, in the field of nanomedicine, which might use the discovery to create super strong wrappers for molecules of drugs so they can be delivered exactly where they're needed. For example, directly to a cancer tumor. The durable wrappers could withstand the body's best efforts to degrade the foreign substance. And so I'm quoting here, and so this is what one of the researchers said. He said, there are all sorts of potential applications in material science, building things, medicine. That was Edward H. Egelman, PhD of University of Virginia's Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Genetics. He said we can use natural products, cellular proteins, etc., to design many new things that are useful. Think of wool, essentially as like a hair, and that's used extensively to make fabrics. That's a protein. So there are many implications for using this to build new materials. So I guess I have a question for you, Chris, is what other type of materials do you think are out there that we still haven't discovered yet? I mean, what do you think the future holds for new types of materials? I know we've talked about graphene and things like that on the show, but I mean, have you heard of anything else, or do you think we're going to discover more and more materials as the years go on?
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, there, obviously things like graphene or spider silk are the du jour when you're talking about material science, and even like industrial usage. I don't know if you saw, maybe it was about a year or so ago, they had created this concrete where it soaks up all the water. So they just dumped all this water onto this concrete, and it was able to soak it up. So there would be, no water spillage, and you can imagine this on a highway. So you hit the right word there, nanoscience, right? And that's currently where we're at, right? We're entering this new era where we're able to completely change at the nano scale. And so we're able to create different types of material that is going to, augment the construction industry, augment the biotech industry, life sciences, healthcare, just really about anything, creating things. So it's a really amazing time. I can't guess what's going to come next, just because I mean, it seems like every week I'll learn about a new cool thing that is indestructible and has all these potential uses. But one thing we have to remember is that when stuff is made in a lab, it's actually extremely hard to scale. It might be to where it's improbable that we can do it because the science just is not going to be there, and it's not going to catch up to the scale factors. Are going to need us to be able to spray this on, let's say, a car or a train or a road, just because it's just not cost effective, right? So I am somewhat a grain of salt whenever I see some of these, because there's so much promise. Wow, this is amazing. But it takes a long time to get out of that lab and actually, go into the foundries or go into the labs of, an Abbott or a Johnson and Johnson or a, John Deere. So, we can actually build these things. One thing that I think is a really cool combination when it comes to nanomaterials or biotech or anything like that is actually the combination of 3D printing along with autonomous robots, right? So to me, I'm just imagining a world where you're able to combine these really great material science along with the autonomous flying drones and or robots. I just put this actually on our Facebook page where it was this bricklayer, where there's an autonomous bricklayer that can build these.
Saw that.
Build these really great walls, right? And it's still not there. It's not perfect. You know what I mean? Like, but that material is just right there. So and you may have a 3D printer that is building these really super strong materials, which, by the way, the material came from the nanoscience. You see all these things converging where we may be able to make super strong structures that may be light, have the ability to reflect light properly. Maybe you see this a lot happening where we're building material that allows us to actually create energy out of it, whether it's solar cells, whether it's this artificial photosynthesis that you've been seeing a lot in the news. So there's a lot kind of happening all at the same time. However, it's still kind of far away to where we're going to see this on a scale that's really going to start to affect our lives. So I'm going to give it 10 years, a decade, maybe 20 years. But anytime I see this material science, it gets me excited.
Well, I think that's one thing. If we can take anything out of this discussion, is that can we just admit that nature is pretty freaking cool?
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that we're still discovering. As far as we advance in science and technology, we're still discovering things that beat everything that we've invented. That like this one virus that's been around for who knows how long has these abilities that we've been working on for decades, years, hundreds of years, and we can continue to learn from nature and apply it and have realistic applications. I just think that means that there's so much more out there we haven't discovered, and I'm really excited.
Okay, great. So for my present future today, I happen to find this article on Medium, and it's called "Don't Be Evil: The War Between Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple." So, as we all know, these are the big four big tech giants of the day. And they are, I mean, we might not call it a war, but there is definitely a big tech battle happening. There's kind of these folks and kind of everyone else in the tech landscape. And, we all, I think we all have an idea of, about these companies. Obviously, Google, the internet search engine, dominant player for decades, going all the way back to the 2000s. But also, heavily invested in many apps to include, Google Maps, Waze. They're behind Chromebooks, Gmail, Google Docs. They have cloud platform capabilities, and of course, you have Facebook, which is the social media giant. Over a billion people on it as well, and their market cap or stock market price have been rising ever since their IPO just a few years ago. Amazon, which just did a gigantic acquisition of Whole Foods as they try to sort of tackle the grocery store market. They're doing so well in terms of their operational capability and sort of disrupting so many industries all at the same time that Jeff Bezos is now one of the richest persons, or he keeps going back and forth between the richest person on earth versus not being the richest person on earth, but he's got a lot of money, over $70 billion. And then, of course, there's Apple, the luxury brand known for iPhones and iPads and Apple TV and MacBooks and the Apple Watch. A true blue leading edge product company with a brand spanking new headquarters. And also, oh, by the way, is the most profitable company in the world, sitting on over $250 billion worth of cash that actually we've talked about. So, the idea of these four big, huge tech giants, and are they doing evil? Essentially, this article it's kind of doing it in a sort of a cheeky way, but the idea is true. These tech companies they're controlling all our lives, right? Whether it's through their products, whether it's through their services, even like Amazon, cloud services, whether it's using Gmail, whether it's understanding what human knowledge is about and how to connect with it. These are the four companies that will be and probably dominating the tech landscape for the next decades, if not maybe towards the end of the century. So I think it's important to understand both the positive and sort of negative effects of having these behemoths go. I mean, keep in mind too, when it comes to advertising on the internet, the one thing that we thought we could get away with, it seems like advertising is even worse, I think, now than ever before. And there's a sort of a duopoly happening between Google and Facebook, where I believe close to 70%, 64.6% of digital ad dollars are coming from these two companies alone. So it's sort of a duopoly, similar to the fact that Amazon disrupted the book business, where you see, and not only that, but we're talking just retail stores in general. There's a retail apocalypse happening, and every single week there seems to be another Sears, Kmart. I know my fiance, she really likes BB clothes. That's been closed down. 7 Jeans. I mean, we're talking, there's a major disruption happening across the retail landscape. And then, of course, even moving to leading edge technology like augmented reality. We could even add Snapchat in there when it comes to the ability for us to interconnect and how we're going to actually not only connect using our smartphones, but maybe connect using augmented reality and then moving ourselves into the virtual reality space. So, I think this article, yes, it's trying to say that these companies are so huge, we need to watch for it and everything like that. I do agree with that, but I do see, as normal on this podcast, see a lot of positive influence from some of these companies. I think these companies have, at least for the most part, they have a pretty good track record with maybe taking some missteps along the way, but then actually correcting things. So whether it comes to fake news on Facebook, or being fined for not doing the correct practices in Europe, or just being open and as honest as they can with their stockholders, these four companies are doing the best job that they can. They're just doing what all businesses are supposed to do, which is grow as best as they can, create products as quickly as they can, and go out there and shape the world with a good positive influence. So, I'm looking at these companies with bated breath. I'm paying very close attention to them, but I also think I see them as a change for good, and as a way for the world to be able to use their very capable engineers, their very capable developers, their strategists, to help shape a better, more automated and connected future. So I'm kind of on board with these folks.
But I think this is an interesting way to look at the big four. One of the articles that you posted says that Google's after your mind, Facebook's after your heart, Amazon's after your needs and your stomach, and that Apple's after your other parts. So we have to understand like how much these companies, and I agree with you, they've penetrated our society. And just, I mean, they're making so much money. It's ridiculous. Google's making just over $79 million a year in just ad revenue. Just ad revenue. I mean, I know that's a majority of what what their profits are based off of, but I think that they're dominant, but they're not as dominant as people are saying, or as people fear. I think that if you look at other countries outside the United States, there are other players, maybe not within the United States, but outside the United States that are coming in, that are going to compete, that are currently competing. If you look at Tencent and Alibaba, like both of those companies,
Baidu. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Baidu, like all of them are coming in, and they're going to come into the United States very soon. They're trying to come in and compete, and I like competition. I think it's going to do very well it does very well for the consumer. I don't like the fact that these are mostly stolen technologies that they've come up with, but I don't think they're as like I said, as dominating as we fear. Because I mean, look at Microsoft 20 years ago. Everyone thought Microsoft was this giant that nobody could defeat, and then it got broken up. Or look at AT&T, and it did the same thing, even though AT&T is now coming back. These are the companies that everyone thought that would too big to split, or that nothing would ever happen to them. But I see that this is going to be this is I don't think it's going to be until the end of the century. I think that a lot of these are facing very real challenges that they're going to have to compete in the next decades, and I don't know if all of them can do that.
Sure. Well, and the one thing that I would say is that I would pay attention to the big moonshot sort of ideas that some of these companies are doing. On Facebook and Google are searching for ways to get internet connectivity across the entire world, whether it's through balloons or satellite technology. Google and Apple are both working on autonomous cars, which is particularly intriguing. We know that's going to be a big thing. We talk a lot about that. And of course, as I was alluding to when I was talking about these companies initially, augmented and virtual reality, all of these companies are investing in that sort of technology as well. So, I think in some ways these companies, they're going to sharpen their saws, their technology saws. I think they'll probably still gain in value. And yes, there's going to be other companies that are going to come along and be able to innovate better. But these are the giants of our day. These are the Exxons, the IBMs, the Kodaks, the Walmarts of our current day, the tech titans, if you will. And you have to pay attention to them. They're market movers. They're market shakers. They're just that disruptors. That trite term that we're always pushing out there. But you got to pay attention to what they're doing. And and I think too, you have to hold them accountable for things that we disagree with. Is it okay to have a monopoly like Amazon take over all of e-commerce? Is it okay to have a duopoly when it comes to digital marketing happen? How much security and data information taking our faces, right, and being able to we're seeing right now the power of the influence of social media on our elections, and you can bring down a whole country. So we have to. We're not going to just give our hearts, give our minds, give our stomachs, and our other parts of our bodies to these companies. I think we actually have to make sure to keep our minds, make sure we have a proper regulatory framework in place that ensures that we don't have not enough competition happening here. Because when you have monopolies, that's when you have corruption, and that's when you have the inability to do proper innovations, because things are just stuck, under one group.
Well, I think that if you look at it, and in the regards of monopolies, and I think that one thing that they're doing very well is purchasing competition. They're buying competition. That's why they're able to maintain that ad duopoly, is that they're able to buy companies that could possibly compete or outbid them, do things to do that. But that's something that Microsoft was doing 20 years ago. I think there's a famous Simpsons episode where Homer Simpson invented a business, and Bill Gates comes and tries to buy it from him, and then when he can't buy him out, he actually like just ends up like closing his business. So I mean, like that's the kind of mindset that these companies are following, and fortunately or unfortunately, it's that they're not always right, but right now they're doing the right things to stop that competition from coming in. But I don't see them. I don't see it being a lasting monopoly. I see that they're going to face stiff competition, and that's going to drive the innovation, like we said. So I think it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, and it will be. So pay very close attention to the bigs, and also pay attention to their rivals, because they're the ones that are going to cause them to work that much harder. And just be careful out there in the interwebs.
On this segment of PaleoFutures, I wanted to bring up something that we have briefly touched on in many different podcasts, but never tried to tackle as a whole. That's just because there's so much that we could talk about. So I'm going to play a soundbite, and I can guarantee you that you'll recognize almost immediately what we're going to talk about on this PaleoFutures. And of course, that is a soundbite from the media franchise of Star Trek. With over 700 episodes and more than 13 movies, Star Trek is rightfully one of the greatest media franchises in history. What's more is that the franchise is still going, with plans for even more of the rebooted movies and a new television series. And the reason that I'm bringing it up on PaleoFutures is because the franchise, which began 50 years ago in 1966, has so accurately predicted many different types of future technologies, has reflected many of the different philosophies and political situations at the time of their recordings, and has inspired generations of scientists and futurists. So in order to attempt to give this like some real justice, Chris, I've broken this PaleoFutures down into segments. First, we'll be examining the technologies that were predicted that we have already created since the beginning of the show in the 60s. Second, we will discuss technologies we are just now beginning to create and are within the realm of possibility. And third, we will discuss technologies that are probably just never going to happen. After that, I figured you and I, Chris, can discuss the different political thoughts, the forward thinking, and the philosophies that are featured in the show. So like I said, first let's go into the technologies that were featured on the show that we have now, that we've now since invented in the period of, 50 years since the show began. All right, so let's start with communicators. So that's a pretty interesting one. So we have this technology now. It's called cell phones and Bluetooth, which allows us to do things that they could do on the Starship Enterprise. We have video chat that's featured in the on-screen communications between ships and within the ship. We have things like the ship's computer. While it's not as smart as AI, which that we're now developing, it's nevertheless a very intelligent computer that can respond to voice commands. Oh, look, Siri, and can perform very complex tasks. The antimatter generation. Now, this is something that's pretty cool that we've actually just been able to find antimatter in the past couple of years, but not nearly enough to power a spaceship like what the Enterprise is powered with. Ion rockets. We've developed ion rockets very recently. They've enabled probes to visit distant planets and asteroids. We've invented a sensor, or they had tricorders. NASA's recently developed a device that can scan a person for 16 different ailments and diseases without even touching the body. While we're still a ways off from the Star Trek that was able to scan all these different things. That's something that's in the works, which is pretty neat. Cloaking devices, we have them, but they're still rudimentary, obviously. Phasers. So we have laser weapons that include a stun laser that causes enormous discomfort to the skin. So we've invented that. Obviously, if we could go on, tablet computers, hypo sprays, which are injectionless drugs, Google Glass, portable memory, GPS, automatic doors, big screen displays, universal translators, teleconferencing, bionic eyes for the blind or visors, diagnostic beds, and the list goes on and on. I mean, Chris, what else do you think that we've invented that was featured in Star Trek?
I know I've seen, there's so much. I mean, to me, it's it's not just the technology, right? And I think this is the other thing that we were going to talk about. It's the ideas that Star Trek discussed. When it comes to, I know whenever we take a hard look at PaleoFutures and we're like, hey, wow, this did a really great job of, whether it was Minority Report or Children of Men, and the future was really kind of like done really well. And Gene Roddenberry, essentially he wanted to have this be like an Oregon Trail, a Gulliver's Travels type of show where you both have the outer space cool technology, but also you have the big ideas about what society could be. Essentially this is a very altruistic group who is trying to be as peaceful as possible, even though they're constantly getting into adventures where they're battling out with like big lasers and whatnot. And but to me it's more than just the technology. It's actually the social issues that we're taking on, whether it's racism, sexism, imperialism, authoritarianism, class warfare, economics. There's a lot of really interesting ideas that actually we're not even I don't think we've developed as a society to tackle what Star Trek was doing in the 60s. So it's more than just technology. It's actually the ideas that Star Trek is spawning and has continued to spawn, which I think are even more powerful than just than us trying to build a tricorder.
Yeah, well, I mean, so if we look if we look at the technologies, I mean, I think we'll get into the social aspects in a second, but if we look at like the technologies that they predicted, and then we look at the technologies that could still be possible in the future, that's the thing that we have to realize, that that's a huge social aspect of this, is that so many of the technologies that were actually featured that are that aren't currently invented but people are working on are things like the impulse engines, which are fusion reaction rockets, which are also we're aiming for androids. What's funny is that a positronic brain like Enterprise and Mr. Data, that's actually a load of hogwash. That term was actually invented by Isaac Asimov. But so it's the hope of future roboticists and programmers. But other things that we're currently working on that are, or at least we consider, are a possibility, are things like deflector shields, tractor beams, artificial gravity. We've actually found a way to create electromagnetic shields that could shield from harmful radiation in space, but it's nowhere near as powerful as the Enterprise shields. Actually created tractor beams that are portrayed in Star Trek that kind of. So like the ones that are actually portrayed in Star Trek are pretty much impossible. Although scientists have created a very cool sound tractor beam that allows objects to move by bombarding them with sound, which I'm pretty sure wouldn't be very good if you were trying to move like a space vehicle and somebody was inside of it. We haven't necessarily invented a way for artificial gravity yet either, like what they do in Star Trek, that they can just walk around like it's normal. Replicators. So we do have, what's cool is we do have 3D printers. That this technology is still in its infancy. Maybe one day we'll have the tea Earl Grey hot concept, but we're still a way off from that. Holodecks, that's VR, man. That's VR that's become so real that we can interact with it in a way that we can't tell the difference between it and reality. And
teleportation too.
Yeah, teleportation. Well, so there's actually several things that I want to talk to you about. Is that several things that are just pretty much impossible or nearly impossible, and that we'll get into the teleportation. So the transporter, that technology just can't work because there's a lot of at work there. Since we don't really know what you are, your essence is, you could essentially end up basically cloning yourself but destroying the original. So I think we talked about that in another one of our shows. Recent science fiction has attempted to combat this by allowing for the transfer of consciousness to a cloned body, and then that body is then destroyed, and the memories are sent back to the original body. Dark Matter, it's a television show on TV that does that. Subspace communication, like no signal can move faster than light. That's actually proven. You can't really have a signal that's faster than light. Warp drive, while that's mentioned, we've mentioned the Alcubierre drive on the show. The idea of warp travel is just that right now. It's just an idea. It would basically take more energy than the entire sun produces to take matter into warp and out of warp. And so there's no guarantee it would be nearly as seamless as the Enterprise makes it out to be, even if we were able to achieve that. Time travel, that's something that's featured a lot on Star Trek. That's just hogwash again. That's, we've already disproven the fact that, maybe you can send things ahead in the future a little bit, but you can't really go in the past, or it's not hundreds of years or years even. You can't do that. A lot of the healing by the doctors is just basically impossible. You can't just, fix cancer by pointing a laser or something. Maybe it can be, but right now that's still out of our thought pass. Okay, so now I wanted to get into the social aspects, and I wanted to bring you in on this because I think Star Trek, while it's known for the technologies that we've talked about, it also delves into what it means, like what you were talking about, like what it means for the human race, what space travel, what the future means. So in a lot of ways, it reflects the ideas of modern society by tackling the issues of modern day life with an interesting twist of 400 years into the future. That's where we break away from fanboy to futurist, when we view Star Trek as a reflection of the different ideologies that have been around since its first episode. And we discuss what further hurdles we as the human race will encounter if we reach the point of technology featured in the show. So, you discussed race. What else do you think that Star Trek really discussed that was before its time, or takes the idea of what, asks a question of what will the future bring when it comes to certain types of technologies and thoughts?
Yeah, to me, it was again, going back to my original thought, it was, yes, the technology was really cool, but to me, it was the ideas of what it meant to be a human being, and how we interact with other human beings, or aliens for that matter, things that aren't like us, and that obviously, made a lot of sense, especially during the 1960s and 70s when Star Trek first started. Obviously, this was right in the middle of the Civil Rights Acts. There was, the Women's Rights Act, the gay rights. There was the first interracial kiss on Star Trek. The idea of a future of no money, how we explore and how we interact with things that aren't necessarily like us, how we interact with technology. There's just was a lot. The cool thing is that Gene Roddenberry, he pretty much said, "Hey, look, I have the ability to tackle all these things because we're creating this fantasy world, right? This isn't real, but because it's this fantasy world, we're able to actually discuss bigger ideas, right? Because we can create a completely new world of interconnection." And so I thought, and I still think, Star Trek is a show that gives us just as much information on what it's like to be a person and of consciousness in the universe, and how, and what are the steps in order to make us better in terms of a species, and to kind of explore the back and forth between, interacting with other folks, interacting with other planets, interacting with our resources, how technology can both enhance and also hurt us. So there's a lot of things that was and have been explored on Star Trek, and I'm happy that it has existed to kind of put these ideas in people's minds.
Well, I love that you brought up that idea, because so the original Star Trek was actually based in humanism, which is the philosophy that has been around for hundreds of years. It's grounded in the profound faith of the innate goodness of humans and their ability to be rational. So that's where you get like the Vulcans' rationality. You also have elements of utilitarianism, which was promoted by British philosopher Jeremy Bentham, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. However, then you have German philosopher Hannah Arendt, who warned about the dangers of purely utilitarianism, as this can lead to moral ambiguity. I think that they bring that up in like the idea of the Borg, which is a reflection of what could happen if society becomes too advanced and we merge with machines and become a collective mind, that we lose all feeling, and that's where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of whoever else, and you can incorporate them into you, and the idea of innovation is gone. You're right. The show explored the idea of homosexuality, transsexual people, gender neutrality, aliens, beings, and race. You have an interracial alien, Spock, who was half human. They had a Russian on the first show for that time. It was the middle of the Cold War, so that was huge. So you have idea of some really cool ideas too, of like what we're now really starting to discuss in our society, and we've brought up on our show. So meatless future. So in season 1 of the Star Trek Next Generation, it's described that humans have stopped killing animals years ago. And this is what they said. Instead, rely on replicated food items that taste like meat but aren't meat. You've got the idea of what happens with the holodecks and virtual reality, and our interactions with them. And they talk about the Talesians who were so addicted to virtual reality that it destroyed their society by creating endless fantasies. You talk about the future of medicine. You talk about the future of society. There's a society in episode 16 of The Next Generation where number one talks about an advanced society where all needs are taken care of and people are able to focus on the arts and culture, which is what we've talked about when we talk about what happens when jobs end. We also talk about it talks about the breakdown of society when we're completely isolated from each other on different worlds. So I know we could keep going into this, and we're going to drag along. So, I mean, do you think we did a good job of breaking up Star Trek? Do you think we should do another episode on this because we didn't really do it enough justice? I mean, people need to let us know, if they like what we're doing, I mean, what do you think, Chris? I mean, is there anything else that we didn't touch that we could have on? I know there is, but anything important that you think you?
I mean, for sure. To me, right, there's the whole Star Wars versus Star Trek, and I think Star Trek was always the thinking man show, right? Star Wars is it's like a Buck Rogers West, hero's journey. We're used to the hero story, and I think it's fun popcorn type of stuff, but it never was the thinking man show. So yes, I agree. I think it might be worth it for us to kind of get a guest on the show who's got a lot of really great Star Trek knowledge. Yes, I agree. There's a lot of different things that we can learn from Star Trek, whether it's the technology, whether it's how we interact with each other. I think Star Trek was always something. It was a show bigger than people really thought. People really knew what it was, right? I think you could watch it as a popcorn type show, a la Star Wars, or you could actually take a hard look at it and see that it was a vision of what we could be when we're at our very best, and also a vision of where we could go wrong. And I think those are the type of shows that have a big, meaningful impact. I'm glad it's had many iterations too. That means that multiple generations can kind of get a peek into this, which is fine. There's a new Star Trek coming out very soon, so I guess we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think let's get someone maybe on the podcast who's got a lot of great Star Trek history, and we'll poke in for 30 or 45 minutes and see what else we can learn.
I'll call William Shatner up.
We'll do it. All right, great. So for FizBiz today, we'll be taking a look at the world of artificial intelligence. This is actually pretty appropriate because I've been tasked with helping and aiding the strategy of artificial intelligence for my own company. I'm not going to be spreading my company's gospel. I think I'm going to be taking a good hard 10,000 foot look at this too. But I thought it was very appropriate for us to kind of take a hard look at artificial intelligence and kind of discuss kind of what it's really all about. I think when people think of artificial intelligence, I think they think of like the Terminator, right? Or, something robots. Along robots, right? That are going to kill us and whatnot. And, there's been a lot of talk, Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, Sam Harris, a lot of these folks are bringing up that we could create this golem that could essentially, take over our systems and, cause the annihilation of us or parts of our infrastructure and everything else. So I think there is some stuff to be worried about. But before we get worried, I think we really need to understand what AI essentially is. So essentially all artificial intelligence is it's just intelligence that is able to be exhibited through machines. So the field of AI research, it defines itself as really the study of intelligent agents. So any device that perceives an environment and then takes an action to maximize its chances of success at some particular goal. So, recently we've been seeing these computer programs, these sets of algorithms and machine learning capabilities that are able to tackle complex tasks that take a lot of sort of human intelligence. So whether this is understanding human speech, competing at very high level, strategic games such as chess or Go, autonomous cars, how content's delivered, military simulations, complex data, and then in the future, it's going to be taking a harder look at things that are like even more complex, such as macroeconomics or climate change models and sort of things like this. But the one thing that I think we hear it so much in the news, it's really gobbling up a lot of the oxygen in the tech sector. You and I both work in there, and I know we've been hearing a lot about it in the past couple months as companies are jockeying to create their own AI strategies. But AI really has been in existence in terms of theory since the 1950s, starting with the work of Minsky, Alan Turing, of course, even before that. And the research started with John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, Alan Samuels, who was at IBM, Alan Newell, Herbert Simon, and of course, it was funded by the Department of Defense during the same time too.
DARPA.
Yeah, and now DARPA is taking over as a leading, similar to what Bell Labs did in the 50s and 60s. DARPA is our actual government R&D engine, similar to the Rand Corporation that Herman Kahn did, and that's another PaleoFutures that we looked at. But it was really theory, right? Whether it came to the Turing test to what AI would be, it was theory just because the computing power had not caught up to it. And so there's been work, there's been algorithms, there's been these machine learning mechanisms that have been made really since the 70s and 80s, but only now are we starting to see AI really be taken on as a technology that has the ability to be sold for services. So the ability to kind of take AI, combine it with cloud computing capabilities, which allow for really high level, high performance computing, which allows you to take care of these algorithms. But also the innovations are happening because we have all this data that we can use in combination with the algorithms, which allow us to actually make these key decisions that we were talking about, whether it's you're trying to win at Go or whether you're trying to get a car from Las Vegas to LA, using just Google Maps and LiDAR protections, right? That takes up a lot of communications. It takes up a lot of synergies happening across networks. It takes up, really the technology that we have today. We just didn't have it in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and so now artificial intelligence is exploding. All these things are happening all at the same time, and it's really dominating the technology landscape. Now, I think we need to kind of define what AI is, though, and we need to kind of segment the different types of AI that's there. So, there's some low-level automation that happens. This automation is called robotic process automation. This is when we are using platforms to do sort of low-level tasks. So imagine somebody who is doing computer entry, and whether it's on an Excel sheet or some sort of green screen type of scenario. You have somebody in India or somebody in Indonesia, and they do the same clicks. So what this RPA does, it allows us to sort of automate some of these some of these white collar work, so we can sort of speed up efficiencies and processes, saving time and also saving man hours, which it enables companies to have more profit. So RPA is sort of the beginning of what AI could be, and then it gradually becomes more and more and more complicated. Another piece of the AI puzzle is something that's been talked a lot about recently. This is chatbots, conversational artificial intelligence, or virtual agents. You may have seen these before. If you go on 1-800-Flowers or some of the customer service type of apps, you may have a almost like, you remember that Clippy, that the thing that was going to help you, and
Then
Microsoft
turn to
is
a dog, right?
right.
On
Yeah,
work.
exactly. So, these chatbots. They initially started by, as somebody just creating a bunch of data and information, and it was kind of wonky and didn't work very well. And as a matter of fact, we've seen this work nefariously, where I think Microsoft created one a year or so ago, and ended up being a racist chatbot because
Yeah, I remember that.
because the internet sort of messed it up, right? But these chatbots, I mean, it's like Siri on your phone, or Alexa in your house. I currently have Google Home, so the ability to ask questions on the fly, get direct interaction, and also constantly learn how to answer the proper questions and connect itself to really, what's out there in the internet. Additionally, there are AI platforms for each industry. So whether it is double checking the correct, banking protocols that happen when it comes to financial exchanges, whether it's artificial intelligence programs that are being used to augment logistics, shipping, and processes. Artificial intelligence is really gobbling up and taking on pretty much every industry in a bunch of ways, and getting to a point where we may eventually get to the leading edge of AI, which is called cognitive computing and data science, where we're getting into predictions, those large scale models that we were talking about in terms of trying to understand really complex questions, and maybe getting to the point where we can even do things that are extremely complicated, like mapping the human mind, mapping the human genome, understanding how photosynthesis works. So, we are definitely in the middle of a artificial intelligence explosion. And I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I know you've gotten a lot of information on AI working in your job as well. And what's going on out there?
Well, I think analysts believe AI is the next big thing for a very simple reason. And one way or another, it's expected to be the main driver of economic and productivity growth in the next 2 decades. And I think you've kind of covered it in the fact that you believe, that you said that scientists, they've been working on this for decades, but the progress really hasn't happened until more recently. It's been propelled by advances in the machine learning and the deep learning. Machine learning is the field of study that gives computers the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed in order to analyze data and solve problems without the manual programming of specific functions. While the deep learning that you were talking about is an area of machine learning which has the objective of mimicking the brain by constructing artificial neural networks. The computers are trained to recognize sounds, patterns, images, texts, and so on. When I think of the future of AI, I also think of that processing power that will be required to run AI. So when I'm thinking about just specifically for FizBiz, companies that will be good to invest in, when I'm looking at it, I think IBM, I think NVIDIA, which are already developing the quantum computer power to be able to run these processes. I look at Salesforce because it's got a proven revenue, and I just I know you've mentioned Google. I just personally don't really trust Google's innovation capabilities right now. I hate to say that, but I look at Google Glasses and I look at the Google phone, the first one, and I see, oh man, that didn't really do that well. So I mean, you tell me. I mean, what companies do you think that are going to be the ones that you suggest that people pursue the most? I mean, which one will be wise investments when it comes to AI?
Well, I think you've already mentioned some of them. So, NVIDIA actually has been listed as one of the top most innovative companies in the past couple of years. I think they're number one currently, and it's because they've shifted actually from just doing, creating computer chips for video processing. They said, "Holy cow, we actually can create chips that can augment this AI world." But a lot of these same big tech companies that we were talking about before, the Facebooks, the Microsofts, the Googles of the day, they are investing heavily in AI. They actually have a lot of great computer scientists on board. And one thing when it comes to artificial intelligence, you actually have to have the talent. You have to have the people to be able to develop these platforms, develop these algorithms, develop the machine learning capabilities that is going to allow these companies to create products and services that are actually going to be helpful for a lot of these companies. So, in some ways, it's if you want to pay attention, you want to have a really good technology portfolio, you probably want to have a mixture of the bigs and the smaller innovative companies that you think are doing really good algorithmic work and are really tackling a particular problem well. Whether that's signaling in terms of subway communications, autonomous cars. It's very important to actually pay close attention to how AI is actually impacting businesses, impacting industries, and if it's saving money, if it's finding additional revenue, or it's saving time, and it's doing it consistently through adequate case studies, then you need to identify the companies that are pursuing that and doing that well, and then choose to invest in those. The bigs are going to be there. They're going to be able to put a lot of their money and capital into AI, and they'll probably be at the forefront for a while. But if you want to, have higher returns, I'd pay very close attention to the industry efficiencies first. Pay close attention to that, and then see if Facebook or Google or IBM. My guess is no. It might be a smaller tech company that was able to create an algorithm that was able to create these efficiencies, and it's those companies where you're going to get a probably higher return, versus spending $100 to $200 to $300 a share with one of these bigger companies.
Yeah, well, I think people have to remember, if you're looking at this, is that the research firm Tractica forecasted that artificial intelligence revenue will reach $59.8 billion worldwide by 2025. That's up from $1.4 billion in 2016. So that's a huge difference. I think if you keep going on and you see, I guess my question for you, Chris, is where do you see these bots going? What's the future of this?
So there's a real push for us to get out of the desktop and handheld world, right? So whether it's gesture computing a la Minority Report, whether it's using interconnected interfaces that are audio based or that are helpful. This is the world that we thought that we would see 10, 15 years ago, when we would say, turn on our television and look this up, give me information. It makes a lot of sense, right? And we're currently just messing around with it. I highly recommend folks just go and purchase an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, or mess around with Siri. This is the type of technology you actually need to start to get really good with working with, because we're not going to be inside of our phones, that our kids are not going to be doing that. They're not going to be typing. They're going to be using their voices. They're going to, in the future, they may even be thinking of, their needs and having it come up. So, if anything, the future of chatbots and the future of AI is really, AI will find its way into really much of the technology that's out there, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's just cloud-based computing, whether it's the Internet of Things. AI and machine learning, deep learning, and the algorithms that will be building this technology, it's going to embed itself in just about every single piece of technology. So it's not only the future of the world, but it's really the future of business. And so that's why it's really important to pay very close attention to the artificial intelligence that's used properly, that, like I said, is creating efficiencies in business, is allowing companies to expand their portfolios, to innovate faster, to find other regions, channels, save money. I think if in some ways it's going to be a lifeline to some of the struggling businesses that are having a hard time in this disrupt land that we currently have. But also, there's going to be probably a lot new products and services that will be coming out of that. So I think we're at the beginning of the explosion, and I look forward to seeing the evolution come. All right, great. So for the interview segment for the SomeFuture podcast, we'll be speaking to Maree Conway, who's been working at universities for 28 years before starting her career as a foresight practitioner and researcher, running the Thinking Futures practice since 2007. Maree has a bachelor's of arts from Griffith University, a master of educational administration from the University of New England, and she's currently working on a PhD at Swinburne University of Technology. And what's that PhD in?
The topic is the future of the university as a social institution. So I'm exploring how the ideas, the beliefs, the assumptions that we all hold about what universities are and what they do, and how those, the way we think about universities, are enabling and constraining its possible futures.
Wow. So, I mean, that puts us right into this. I mean, the work you do currently is, you help people and organizations reframe strategic conversations, about the future using foresight and integral futures, and that there's some stuff to unpack there as well. But I was wondering, I mean, what is the future of universities? Why are universities, so vital, you think, to our society?
I don't know what the future of the university is. I wish I did, but I think my kind of passion for universities emerged from working in them for so long. I started working in them a year after I graduated from my BA, and I kind of grew up in them, and I was immersed in the academic culture for a long time, and I've seen them change over that time. And there's I think my assumptions, my beliefs are around the value universities add to society around helping people come together and learn how to think and learn how to contribute more broadly to society. Now, that everyone writes those kind of things.
Sure.
In the literature, everyone says that, but there's something about the opportunity to talk with other people, to challenge your own thinking, to learn stuff that you never will learn. Well, that's not true anymore, but that you won't learn unless you're in that environment where you can spend the time, the dedicated time to think
Sure.
more broadly.
So you don't know what the future will be, right? But I mean, one thing that you're working on is trying to figure out how you're going to manage this structure anyway. And that's, I think, when I was reading into the work, some of the things you were looking at is really not only the university itself and what it will be, but also how you would manage this educational structure. Could you talk to our audience a little bit about the future of management and really it's really just the future of how to organize a group of people to do exactly what you're talking about at their educational pursuits?
Yeah, I think the first thing now is that university as we know it today may not have a future. And one of the things that I discovered in my research and talking to people is that most of the people who work in universities today, there will be a university in the future, and assume that it will be something like today. And I don't actually believe that, but you can't say that in a PhD. You have to, be much more objective. But if that university does emerge, it could be all sorts of shapes and forms and structures. But I think ultimately universities have to move very quickly away from the hierarchical top-down command and control approach that's prevalent now, because that way of managing people and getting things done just leads for total overwhelm. And I work now with groups of managers in universities, and they all come with the same issues, that what they're learning is wonderful, but how are they going to take it back into the workplace? Because there's this structure and these systems that seem to constrain getting things done. So that's one thing. We have to change how we view universities as an organisation and start treating people, not as cogs in a wheel. And it sounds really strange talking like that about an organisation today, but given what's going on outside universities and the different sorts of organisational structures that are emerging, but that's how universities by and large still operate. So I think we need to put people and students and learning and research and contribution to society back at the centre of working out what universities do, and then we can work out how to manage it so that it will work properly. Because now people talk about working in universities as toxic, which is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And so there has to be a mind shift, change about what universities are and what they do in this society in which they're operating today. And then how do you manage that rather than just bringing with it the legacy from the past, which is what they've done.
So your work then in the future of the university, what have you uncovered that you think is a way to sort of change from this? We'll just do what we've done in the past and just sort of keep this going. I mean, I think you were alluding to in some of the things, that maybe our audience doesn't know about is, the democratization of information, which is extremely important. The fact that there are going to be new ways of getting accreditation. We've spoken about that on the podcast too. So, like you said, it's really difficult to figure out the future of the university. But is there anything that you've sort of uncovered that you thought were actually not only maybe particularly novel, but actually a way to get through, to get out of this sort of stuck nature, like you said, what we're currently at?
I think my PhD is focused on worldviews, really, rather than it's a theoretical PhD. So what I'm aiming to do at the end of it is to come up with some implications for university managers and policy makers today, both in universities and government. But so I'm interrogating the literature. So the literature is my data source. So what I'm finding there very clearly is that there's different ways of thinking about the future of the university. So one is that we just have to keep it like this. Government needs, it's the neoliberal resistance thing, people need to back off and just leave us alone like they've always done. And there's another view that says, well, technology will save the university. let's just make the university totally AI, artificial intelligence driven, and everything will be fine. And there's another view that says, well, let's reclaim the university and put it back in the public space where it belongs. I think most people in universities want the university to survive, and they're looking for ways to do that. And what I've been looking at is primarily, as you said, structuring a view of the external environment that includes all those big changes that are coming. So changes to work, changes to organisational structure, the technology, obviously, and that includes things like blockchain and artificial intelligence. And 2 years ago, when I asked people about artificial intelligence, they weren't interested. Now they're interested. It's become mainstream, so they go, I'll pay attention to this. But ultimately, what's happening in the external environment isn't as important as how people respond to it. So if you take face value and just say, we respond to all these changes and look what government's doing to us, they're decreasing our funding, and and so you get wrapped up in this, like a mouse on a wheel going round and round in circles, trying to respond to all these changes in the external environment. And so what I'm finding more and more in my research is that we have to stop and step back and think more about what is a university, how can it fit into this environment that's changing all the time, and then work out what it is you have to do and how you do it. And universities have never really done that. They've always taken their reference point from themselves, and they've decided what they do and how they do it, and society just has to live with it. But right now society is saying to them, well, all this change is happening and society is changing, and we want to do things differently, and we want you to do things differently. And there's a clash going on here, because there's a big group in universities who just want society to back off and leave them alone, and there's a big group in society that want universities to change. So you can see already that there's different forms of universities starting to emerge. There's reframing of existing universities. So the university as we know it won't survive in this form. It will change, but it will be a very painful change, I think, because of the way people think about the university. People hold it dear, and deep in their hearts. So I think before we start getting into the changes that are going to shape the university, and we know what they are, we have to step back and say, well, how do we actually think about a university, and what are our assumptions, and how can we make sure that those assumptions are valid as we engage with this external environment?
Sure.
Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
Well, no, that's why you're here. This is perfect. But you did say something that I found particularly helpful there, and I was wondering if I can go back there. You were talking about, universities. We don't know what a university is, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's an important question, right?
Yeah.
And it's one that I thought I knew of. So, I mean, what do you think a university is then?
Well, for me, a university is a gathering, really, of people who come together to try and make society better. And that could be by research, it could be by teaching, it could be by learning something, it could be by working in them, because I think when you work in a university, there's this osmosis effect that goes on and you kind of get absorbed into the university culture. For me, it's an institution. It's been a social institution all its life, and for me, that's what it is. But what the problem today is that it can't define what its social value is in this world where, as you said, democratization of knowledge, technology, accreditation, everything's changing around them, and it's lost the power to self-define what it is and what it does. And so it's being challenged in ways it's never been challenged before. So for me, it's, as I said, it's this place where people come together to create value for society and make society a better place. But that's probably not what the government thinks a university should be. So and there's
much to the detriment of I think maybe society as well.
Yes.
Perhaps.
And there'll be people who are saying, well, and they are saying, well, we don't care about the university. It's old hat, it's outmoded, and they're going on and they're creating, their own version of how to bring people together to learn and make society better.
And what are some of these? Just because this is a futures podcast, but at the same time too, there are new listeners who don't understand all the things that are happening to universities right now. Can we talk a little bit about all the different disruptions that are happening in the? I mean, we don't have to go through a laundry list, but can you just kind of give us some broad strokes of what are the things that are causing universities to completely shift and change?
I mean, the biggest one, and the one that you read about everywhere, is this neoliberal approach that governments have adopted that have turned universities into this kind of, the measured university, and that cares less about people than about, outcomes and data and evidence-based and, all those sorts of terms that you hear. And the literature around that is huge. And that's kind of the framework for the changes that are happening in universities. So the other biggest issues are that, universities and higher education that they deliver used to be for the elite, but now it's not. It's for the masses. And that's still an issue for people in terms of how do you actually deliver services, my words, not theirs, but deliver services around knowledge to the masses in an effective way. The funding for universities and higher education in general has been, drastically reduced, and it continues to be reduced and cut. And that makes working for everybody on a day-to-day basis really difficult. Universities, though, are really good at taking on new things and not so good at dropping things, but they're getting better at that. But they often slash things based on numbers rather than purpose and outcomes. The increasing vocational focus that governments are demanding of universities is a really hard one for people to come to grips with, because they know they have to deliver education that will help people get jobs, but to design the way they do it all around that is kind of a bit antithetical to how they think. And the increased transparency and accountability demands, reporting all the time, generating, screeds of data that they have to put into a report and send off to somebody. And when I was in charge of the unit that did that in a couple of universities, it was incredibly frustrating because you'd have to report in 10 different directions. And so you'd spend your time creating, data and massaging it and putting it into reports to send off to people, rather than actually, or for me anyway, getting on with the planning and the thinking about the future, which is part of what I was supposed to be doing. So, and I think students exist in society, so they come into the university with different sets of expectations around what they want from the learning experience, and the we know best attitude that universities and staff in universities have had for a long time is really being challenged by that. They don't know best anymore. They have to have a conversation with the students, with people to come to some sort of collaborative agreement about how to do what they do and do it well. But I think they're kind of, for me, that's kind of the cluster of issues.
Sure. No, and that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's why I see you starting to bring in integral futures into this, because it's a lot of these ideas are about not only internal forces inside the university, whether it has to do with people or and managing the systems, but also, like you were alluding to, all the external forces that are happening too. So, wondering if you can kind of give us a little bit of introduction into what integral futures is and how it's kind of dovetailing into your work.
Sure. I came across integral futures when I was doing my strategic foresight study at Swinburne, and it kind of made immediate sense to me. This, not necessarily the Ken Wilber framework, which is the framework that we learned at Swinburne. That's just one way to do integral work. But for me, it made sense, and so I started to use it, and I've used it ever since. So it's a framework that integrates the visible and invisible in organisations. Now, I'll use organisations as my context, but you can apply this framework to any issue or problem or phenomena that you're trying to understand. So for me, trying to understand universities, it connects the invisible part of universities, which is related to the individuals in the organisation, their beliefs, their assumptions, their values that they bring to the university. And the other part of the invisible side is the culture of the university. And for me, that's the space where we collectively define what we think a university is. So it connects that invisible space with the visible space of the university, which is where we live and work. And it's what we've been talking about just before. So it's the change that's going on in the environment in which the university is trying to fit itself and deliver valuable services. And then it's how people behave in organisations when they come together to work and to have the strategic conversations about how to respond to the change in the external environment. So usually in organisations, most of the effort is on the visible side. So, people they understand the change that's shaping their organisation. They set up wonderful change management projects, and, there's processes, and people come together and they have conversations. Everyone's really comfortable with that side. But when you move to the invisible side of the organisation, it starts to become more challenging. But they're the things that actually drive behaviour and action and decision making. So when change management projects are set up and they fail, everyone goes, well, we had a change management process and we set up an office and we had a project plan and we did all this reporting, and they didn't talk to the people. They didn't find out what the people were thinking about the change. They didn't involve the people in helping to structure the change. So it was imposed on them. And the culture and the things that are deeply embedded in organisations and universities that we take for granted and we don't challenge, and they keep influencing our decisions and our behaviour, they're ignored as well. Or we pay lip service to them. So integral for me brought those two things together. And as my Thinking Futures business has evolved, integral has become more central to how I work with people, because it's easy to run a process, but if you want the process to have impact that matters, then you have to also understand individuals and their beliefs about the future and the cultural enablers and constraints that kind of prescribe how open to the future the organisation is.
So was there anything novel that you that you were able to understand when it came to sort of applying integral futures to the university space? Was there anything that you had any aha moments when you were applying this framework to looking at your research?
I think it became really clear when I mapped it across the integral frame, which is the 4-quadrant frame, and it became very clear that, like all organisations, universities operate in the visible space, and that's how they construct their reality. But once you move into the invisible space, it's suddenly, and this was kind of the process of my PhD. I had topics, and it eventually came to this topic because I suddenly realised that this was the issue. It wasn't anything in the visible space. The issue about ensuring the university as a social institution had a future wasn't related to what people did and how they responded to change. Though that's very important. The critical thing was the cultural idea of a university. What it is. What is it that we think a university is? What's its purpose? What's its role? And how can that be defined in the society that we're in at the moment? So I hadn't really got to that nub until I mapped it on the integral frame. I kind of had an idea about it, but that suddenly became front and center for me by being able to say, well, that if we don't look at that idea of the university that we all hold and take for granted and don't articulate usually, then nothing I write about on the right-hand side matters, because people will still, and that's the kind of what I see in the literature, people will hold this idea very strongly and they will believe it to be true and they will fight for it. And that's counterproductive in an environment where the world's kind of exploding around you.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Did you happen to now that you have this understanding that you have to deal with the inside as well as the external, are there any sort of next steps in order for universities to be able to bridge the gap between all these different things that are causing universities to change? If I was the head of a university right now, let's say, I don't know, Swinburne or Harvard or whatever, what should I be doing to prepare myself for the huge changes that are going to be coming over the next 15 years?
It's actually the last chapter of my PhD, and I haven't written that yet.
You can write it right now.
Yeah. I think ultimately it's saying, well, I think we underestimate the power of conversation, and we don't give ourselves time to come together and have strategic conversations. And this is when I do this work with university staff now, this is what they always say, that it's fine, to talk about strategic thinking, but I don't have time to do it. I have too much to do. I'm so busy, all those sorts of things. And I think we have to make we have to give permission to people in universities to think about the future in a systematic and systemic way. And at the moment, they don't have that permission. So the strategy processes are rarely, even despite the rhetoric that we see, are rarely collaborative, are rarely meaningful in terms of letting people help create the future of the university. The future comes from the senior executive and it's imposed on the university. And that will never work in this environment. It worked in the past, but it won't work now, because people want to be involved in how the future emerges, and they need to be able to see themselves in that future. And if we want them to actually work towards that future, as opposed to just ticking the boxes. So I think for me, that's kind of an amorphous thing. You have to come together and have strategic conversations. But until we start to develop that process in the visible side of universities, we won't be able to start shifting the taken for granted assumptions and beliefs and values on the invisible side. So I think we need to, as I was saying before, we need to move universities away from the top-down command and control approach to a much more collaborative way of thinking about strategy, thinking about where the university's going, and thinking about how to get there. If we keep doing it from the top down, I don't know what will happen. So I mean, I can't say, if you tick these boxes, you'll be prepared for the future. But I do know if we don't change the way we think about how we design university futures, the future without a university is a real possibility, I think.
Absolutely. Do you think though that this research, I mean, that you're doing, the looking inward, when it comes to universities and them having to make strategic conversations, do you think this, and because you do other futures work, outside of the university landscape, so is this the same sort of conversation you're having with other organizations around the world?
Yes. Yeah.
And what
Because
are they learning, I guess, when it comes to having strategic conversations and eliminating the sort of top down approach of doing business or coming together?
Yeah, it's quite difficult for people to. I usually don't work with at the CEO level or the board level. I work with people in departments who run a department or run a unit, and that immediately brings up the the issue of, well, we can do it here, but how do we take it out of the organisation when our leader isn't interested in this stuff? I did some work recently with a transport department around environmental scanning and opening up their view of changes that were shaping the future of transport. And the woman I was working with was fantastic, and she had a direct line to the CEO, and everyone was supportive. And so we did some really good work around setting up a scanning system that went across the organisation, and everybody was going to contribute to it. Then the CEO of that, it was a government department, the director went somewhere else, and they got a new person in who was brought in with a totally different agenda, and the scanning kind of went in a different direction. And then a new boss came in, so in 3 years, 3 bosses, and took her out of that role and put her in another role. So she's no longer championing the futures approach to understanding change. And that's what happens in organisations all the time. It's what happened to me at Swinburne when I was doing it there. So there's getting it embedded in organisations is the biggest challenge people like I have, and I can't do it. I can only give people the the information and the capacity, the thinking capacity, to be able to do it themselves. So I keep getting requests from people. How do we do this? How do we improve the way we think about the future and prepare for it? But unless there's a commitment at the beginning to say, yes, we're going to change what we do to incorporate this process, it's very fragile. It's always fragile, which is one of the biggest frustrations, I think, of this work.
Yeah. And I always tell people, futurists, they're not there to predict the future. They're there to help you, institute some tools so you can go out there and potentially make your own future. But you can't be there hand-holding the entire time. And also, by the way, your future will change depending on how well you implement these tools. So it's super important. It's just, again, coming back to that integral approach. Sometimes we have to look inside of ourselves, inside of our organizations, to see how we can move our firms towards the future.
Yeah, and I think if you get enough, the trick, I think, is to build a critical mass of people who think this way. So I ran some scenario work with the same transport department with different people in the room, not just the scanners, and that actually kind of turned the light bulb on for some people. So now there's a group of about 15 to 20 people in that organisation who've been through a futures process who said, okay, I can see why this is valuable, and they've now gone out into the organisation. So it's that kind of organic spread in organisations that I think right now, anyway, is the way this kind of thinking and approach will get taken up.
So you're spreading futures like a virus.
Yes. Yes, yes. I think that's the way at the moment, anyway. I think that's the most successful way to do it.
So you kind of said this right before I asked that last question, but I think this is it's a good question to leave off on too. Will there always be a university? And I think I from what I heard in your voice, you sounded like you may be writing the tombstone letters pretty soon. But I mean, will there be a university? But I guess then too, this goes back to what is the university? So do you think there will be one? And if not, what will take its place?
I think that a future without a university, personally, is a very real possibility. If we don't stop and think more deeply about what a university is in today's society and how that society is changing and morphing, it's the scenario process. What's possible in the future? Right now, there's just a single image of the future. It's a linear future. It's a business as usual future. It's taking today into the future tweaked. And if that continues to happen, if universities don't adapt their thinking, I mean, they adapt what they do, and they've done that, for 900 years, and they do that well. But it's the thinking that needs to change and adapt. And I think unless that happens across the board, and we all know how easy that will be, given there's now multiple stakeholders involved in deciding what a university is. There may well not be a future where there's a university as we understand it today, but I think that there will be some form of organisation of learning, collaboration to get things done. I mean, we see that now with people who come together to do environmental work, or to have some sort of change that they want to make happen, and they come together. And you can talk about learning in the same way. If we want to make society better in some way, we come together to learn, and we learn off and from each other about how to make the change happen. But I think that the actual knowledge is being so modularized and cut up that you can get information from anywhere now. How you put it together to make sense, I think, will continue to be something a university of some form, no matter what you call it, could do. Because you can draw knowledge and information now from anywhere you want in the world, but making sense of it, I think, will be a continuing role for some form of learning organisation, whether it's a physical organisation or a virtual one. I don't know.
Right.
But I think that unless we do that, unless we kind of reframe what a university is and how it needs to fit into this emerging society, there might not be one.
Well, geez, I better hurry up and put in for my PhD program before they all shut her down.
Yeah, I think it'll take a while. I mean, I'm working to 2045 on my PhD, so it won't be tomorrow.
Well, that's good. I've got plenty of runway. So yeah, are you working on anything currently that may be coming out? I know you're still working on the PhD diligently, but is there anything that you'd like to point the podcast listeners to? Besides your website, of course.
Yeah. I mean, my website's kind of where I kind of I think on my website I write a lot and kind of just think about what I'm doing. But I think my newsletter that I send out every month that has my take on the major changes that have happened that month, people can sign up for that on the website. And I have to do a plug for my book, of course.
Oh yeah, sure. What is that?
Which I published last year, which is called Foresight Infused Strategy. But it's a practical guide for using foresight approaches in organisations. So that was a long-term goal for me to to put together what I've been doing and publishing since 2007 into one place as a how-to guide. So it's my take on how you use futures in organizations. So that you can buy that on Amazon or from my website. Yeah, and it's cheap. It's not really expensive.
Oh, great. All right.
And that was deliberate because I want people to buy it and use it. I don't want people to be put off by this, stupid price.
Well, we really appreciate it, and I thank you. I really appreciate you for joining the podcast, and just thanks so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity. It's great.